If you have such a close encounter with death, if you're right, next door to death, it doesn't ever quite leave you.
It's really good to see you.
Thank you.
By my count, it's been 87 weeks. How are you doing?
I'm surprisingly well. I've surprised myself, but I think I also surprised some of the medical community. I've been inspected by I can't tell you how many doctors, and apart from the bits that can't get fixed, like my right eye, and my left hand it's better, but it's not normal. Other than that, everybody signed off on everything.
Other than that, and yet losing an eye is a major loss.
It's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, frankly, I'm still not used to it. I think about it when I wake up in the morning.
It was a fear you had long before now.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, that the thing you most fear is what happens. I mean, I've always had a fear of blindness. I mean, I was thinking about, if you're asked which of your senses could you do without, I mean, I think I could do without taste and maybe even touch. But I think sight is, for me, the most important.
Certainly as a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knife, the word, is the title. It's kind of a cold metallic fact. But you've decided to reclaim the word, and you've redeployed it as a weapon. Can you explain how?
I mean, it was actually when I really seriously started thinking about writing this book, it was the first word I had. I thought the first thing I knew is what it was called. And for two reasons, really. One is the obvious reason that it takes its point of origin in a knife attack. But then I thought, in a way, there's a passage in the book where I talk about how language is a knife. It's a way of cutting things open. It's a way of revealing the truth, etc. I mean, I don't have guns or knives or etc. I have language. So I think in a way the book itself is my knife.
Yeah. Well, you say that if I had unexpectedly been caught in an unwanted knife fight, maybe this was the knife I could use to fight back.
Yeah, if you're caught in a knife fight, get yourself a knife. And I thought this is my way of fighting back, and also in a way not just fighting back, but like taking control of the narrative, and not just being the victim on the ground with blood pouring out of him, but somebody in control of the story, telling it.
You had a hard time, but you did get into it in a fair amount of detail, the attack. Yeah. I'm just wondering what the strongest image you retain in your mind of the actual attack.
Of the actual attack? Oh, the strongest image I remain is the sense of my own body lying on the ground in this kind of lake of blood. And that's what I remember. It's an expanding lake of blood. The strange thing is, the thing I don't remember, the thing I don't have any memory of, is pain.
Interesting. Even
though people who were there and who spoke to the press afterwards said that I was screaming with pain, I have no memory of that at all.
But you remember what you were thinking at the moment?
Well, I was thinking that I was probably going to die, and it would have been strange not to think that in the middle of this lake of blood.
In fact, you were very close to dying. What do you think saved you?
Well, number of things. First of all, the intervention of Henry Rees, who was on the stage with me, then of members of the audience who collaboratively pulled the attacker off me and held him down until he could be properly arrested. Then, oddly, the fact that it was a sunny day. That if it had been bad weather, the helicopter couldn't have flown. And if the helicopter couldn't have flown, I would be dead. And then, of course, this extraordinary team of surgeons at the Hanomansing Hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania. Different teams of surgeons working on different bits of me at the same time. And at first, they didn't think that they could save me. But fortunately, they were wrong about that.
So 87 weeks later, what continues to save you?
Oh, the same thing that was saving me before the attack, which is happiness and love, you know. But also being able to get back in the saddle, you know, and actually write a book feels very good. Just think, okay, I've only ever had one thing I can do. So it's nice to feel I can still do it.
What do you make of the fact that you had a nightmare a couple of days before this happened? And not only that, but you've actually written about similar scenarios more than once.
Yeah.
What do you make of that premonition?
I don't know what to make of it, because you know, when it happened, the dream, it was 2 days before I went up there. I was quite spooked by it. And I remember saying to my wife, Eliza, that, you know, I don't want to go. And I really thought, I don't want to go, I should cancel.
Why did you go?
And I thought, you know, it's a dream. Who changes their whole day around because of a dream? And also, you know, I said I'd go. They sold tickets. People are expecting me to come. You know, it's all set up.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can't let them down, you know, so just because I had a bad dream. Who would believe that? Sorry, I can't come because I had a bad dream that told me not to come. That just doesn't seem right.
But how do you connect those scenarios that you wrote about that involve knives and blindness and stabbings?
You know, I mean, that's twice. Then Shalimar the Clown is a novel which begins with a knife murder.
Yeah.
And the most recent novel, Victory City, has the central character at one point in the novel is blinded.
Yeah.
And a part of it, I think, is to do with the fact, as I said in the book, that my great fear has always been blindness. You know, and I use the metaphor of Orwell's Room 101, you know, that in Room 101 in 1984, you meet the worst thing in the world. And the worst thing in the world is different for everybody. So for Winston Smith, the character in 1984, the worst thing in the world is rats.
Yeah.
So that's what he meets in Room 101. And for me, the worst thing in the world would be blindness. I don't know, I guess it's been in my head, in somewhere lurking in my head for a long time.
You experienced, of course, a whole span of emotions since the attack. And at several points, you point out in the book that you were quite determined to see your assailant.
Yes.
Why? He's in prison. Why? Why did you want to see him?
I wanted to sit down with him and say, why do you do it? Because there is, to my mind, a sort of absence in his story, you know, which is that he's very young. He has no criminal record up to this point. He wasn't on any terrorism watch list. He wasn't involved with fanatic groups. You know, he was a young guy in New Jersey. And to go from that to murder as a first step is a very big, you know, murder is a very big crime. And yet what he says about me in this somewhat unwise interview that he gave to the New York Post from jail, he said that he'd read 2 pages of something I'd written, and I don't even know what he read. I mean, yeah, the internet is full of garbage. I don't even know if it's 2 pages I actually wrote. And he saw a couple of YouTube videos. And that was his motivation. And I think that's, if I was to write that as a fictional character, my editor would say to me, that's not good enough. You know,
Not a motivated character.
Not convincing.
Yeah.
So there's this absence in the narrative.
You tried to fill in that absence with this
Yeah.
imagined
First, I
conversation.
thought I'd try to fill it in by actually asking him. But then, you know, one of the reasons I included the story about when Samuel Beckett was attacked, the victim of a knife attack, is he in fact did go to court when his attacker was in court, and he said to him, "Why do you do it?" And the man simply said, "I don't know, sir, I'm sorry." Well, that's useless, isn't it? I mean, that doesn't help anybody understand anything. And then I thought, probably if I was to have the opportunity of meeting him, I would get some other banality. I doubt that I would get remorse, because there's no sign of remorse that I've seen. But I'd get some kind of cliched ideological sloganizing, and it wouldn't help me really.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well, let me use what I actually know how to do, which is my gift of imagination and storytelling.
You decided to quietly go back to Chautauqua where the
Yes.
attack happened. Why?
From the moment that I was beginning to feel well, I needed for myself as a kind of healing process to show myself that I'm standing up again, in the place where I fell down. And initially, Eliza didn't think it was such a great idea.
How did you feel afterwards?
But then she thought she could see it was important to me. And so she went along with it. And also she came with me because actually on the day of the attack, she hadn't been there. So she'd never seen the place. So for her, it was a nightmare place in her head. And this was a way of making it real.
Wow.
And it had the most, I didn't really know what the effect would be. I thought the effect could be maybe nothing. And I'd go there and feel nothing. The worst effect would be that it would bring back the trauma. But instead, I literally, as I wrote in the book, I had this very physical sense of somebody removing a burden from me. And what I said to her is, I said, only way I can describe how I feel is I feel lighter. And ever since that day, I've felt lighter.
It's a good reason.
It did what it was supposed to do.
Good reason to go. You also say in the book that you perhaps went back to face up to the unbearable knowledge common to all human beings that it would never be yesterday again.
Yeah, I think that, I remember in the Doonesbury cartoon strip, there's one day where one of the characters says to the other, somewhere near the anniversary of the 9/11 attack, one of the characters says, I really miss September the 10th, the world as it was before the thing that made the world different. And I really miss August the 11th. When I was just, a man in love looking at the full moon in a very beautiful place, having just had a nice dinner with friends, and everything was good.
One cruel morning stands between Salman before then and Salman after. What's the fundamental difference between those two men?
Well, I don't think there's a huge difference. I think I probably managed to get back to myself for the simple reason that the other piece of good luck was that the knife which penetrated my eye did not reach my brain. It got very close, but it didn't touch the brain. And as a result, in that sense, I'm still who I was, and I'm still able to be myself. But I think the real difference is, as far as I've been able to understand it so far anyway, is that if you have such a close encounter with death, if you're right, next door to death, it doesn't ever quite leave you. That knowledge, which I didn't really we all, something's going to happen to all of us.
Yes.
But most of us don't have a kind of intimacy with it. And most of us don't think about it all the time,
No.
Because that would be awful. To do the living before you do the dying. And now it's always with me. It's like a shadow. And I'm not saying that it depresses me or anything, but it's there.
It's just there.
Just there. And that's a change.
You write that it felt in the moment like your attacker was coming at you from another time, that he was a time traveler dragging back an ugly past. How successfully had you left the 90s behind?
Completely. I've been living in New York City for almost 25 years. And during that time, I've lived like a perfectly regular writer's life. Sitting at home writing my books and going out and doing readings and, just...
You were teaching too.
And teaching. For more than 20 years, not full time, but part-time, first in Emory University in Atlanta, and then here in New York University. And I've just been, leading my life in a perfectly regular way. And in that time, I've done, I think, literally hundreds of public events. So lectures, readings, literary festivals, anything you can think of. And there's never been the faintest, not an iota of a problem before.
And I wonder how close to your mind it was, though, given the fact that you reveal in this book that there had been 6 previous actual attempts or attempted attempts on your life.
Yeah, that was in the old days when the Iranian state was doing its best to have, that was when it was employing professionals. Those were not like this. This is a kind of random kid. Those were professional assassins. Hired either by the Iranian state or by proxies of the Iranian state.
And that didn't worry you?
That worried me a lot of the time, but my understanding, as far as I know, is that that's not happening anymore. And so the risk that remains is this, and this only happened because of a failure of security. And where I was sitting like in a chair like this, towards the right of the stage, and my friend Henry Rees, who I was supposed to be having a conversation with, was sitting over to my left, and just over here to my right there was a small flight of stairs, like 4 steps, because the stage area was slightly raised from the auditorium.
Yes.
If there'd been one person standing there, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there's that. I mean, he got lucky.
Yeah. Since that time, since 1989, you've written the majority of your work since then. So you have kind of this real ambivalence in this book and elsewhere about the satanic verses coming back and kind of in the context of this attack 33 years after the fatwa was issued. What does that stir up in you?
Well, it just, I think in many ways the biggest damage that the whole attack on the satanic verses has done is to turn people away from my work. I mean, what people know about me is, I got threatened with death by the Iranian state, and now I got a knife stuck in me. Those facts is what everybody has. But meanwhile, and I've written 2 books which are memoirs, this being the second one, Knife. I've written 20 books which have nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And some of them are quite good. And I just wish that people would look at that side of my life, because that's actually how I've led my life. And from Midnight Children to Victory City, it's a long journey.
Is there any sense in which you became a perfect target, not maybe the right words, but a perfect target because you have a Muslim name, because you say you do not believe in God, because you are who you are? I mean, did you kind of become a perfect target for extremists because of those things?
Maybe it was easy to demonize me for the reasons that you just said. And the demonizing was very successfully done. I mean, to this day, there are a lot of children are brought up to think of me as a kind of boogeyman, and I can't do anything about that. But yeah, that's true, and it's. When I tried to write in the book about there being these different entities bearing my name, versions of me. And there's that is the very dark version of me. I mean, for example, after this attack and the loss of an eye, there is a figure in Islamic demonology who is a kind of one-eyed demon called the Dajjal. And if you check out that beautiful place, Twitter, you will find people saying, now he's revealed himself as the devil that he always was.
And Dajjal's character means they tell lies,
yes,
or they tell fictions.
Yeah. And they're one-eyed.
Yeah, and they're one-eyed.
So that feeds into the demonology that's being created around me. And
how does that sit with you?
No, I mean, that's what's dangerous. That's what's dangerous, because that's what, if somebody swallows that, as it seems this young man may have, then that is a motivating force.
I wonder what you think would happen if the Satanic Verses were to be published today.
Well, you know, I know there's this kind of idea that nobody would have the guts to publish it. You know, I slightly don't agree with that, because you see, the book has remained, it is published consistently in more than 40 languages. So it's not true that if it was published now, it would find it hard to be published, because it is being published, you know, constantly. So I think maybe we don't need to be quite that pessimistic.
But there might be more complaints against what might be perceived as an overstepping.
Yeah, what's different now is social media, and the way in which social media can be galvanized into a mob with enormous speed. And that would be different.
But there is a sense in which there are new areas and new parts of the population in the West that has a looser definition of what freedom of expression, what limits freedom of expression should have.
No, I agree. I feel kind of disappointed in the younger generation, because it used to be that it was kind of old fogies like me who were conservative about what could be said and what was wrong to say, and young people were iconoclastic and you know, let it all hang out. And now it's the other way around. It's an older generation that still holds on to traditional ideas of free expression.
And it's labeled by some as neoliberal.
Yeah, exactly. Those are just insults. You know, we don't have to pay attention to those. But the fact that there's a generation growing up which is willing to suppress speech, which it doesn't like, is extremely alarming. Because, the simple definition of free speech, in order for it to be free, it has to include speech by people you don't agree with. You know, otherwise, not free speech. And there's an increasing feeling that that's a kind of wrong way of thinking, and that it's better to suppress improper speech.
So what would you say to the progressive young person who, of any background, who might say, you know, that sensitivity and respect for difference, particularly for the vulnerable, trumps freedom of expression?
Yeah, well, I'd say they're wrong. And the reason they're wrong is that if you look at the history of censorship, censorship is always exercised by the powerful against the powerless, always. If you try to defend censorship because it acts on behalf of the powerless, that's a very slippery slope, because you're defending the weapon which is usually used against minorities and less powerful people. So it's, I don't know, it's what that exploded philosopher Karl Marx would have called false consciousness. You think you're doing something because it's virtuous, whereas actually it has the danger of being the opposite of what you think you're doing.
Is it a losing battle, getting that message across to today's?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll let you know. Battle ain't over.
In addition to rejecting this notion of ring fencing, I think is the word you use, specific ideas, you also take the opportunity in this book to say that you are still, in your words, a godless bastard.
Yeah.
That we created God to embody our moral instincts. Why was it important to underline that again?
Because it's true. You know, you can imagine this. In an early phase of human development, the world is a mystery. You know, and there are questions that people begin to ask themselves to which they have no answers. How did we get here? How did here get here? You know, and it's easy to imagine a powerful being who is the reason that here got here. You know, and it's an explanation. And then what happens simultaneously is a question of, as societies develop, is a question about morals, about ethics. Now that we're here, how shall we live? What is good, what is bad? What is right action, what is wrong action? And suddenly you've got this overarching being from whom you can argue that the rules come, the commandments. And you can see why human beings in the past, long ago, used religion to explain these two big things, the question of existence itself and the question of ethics. Well, now we are at the point where whatever religion we may be interested in or not interested in, their explanations of origins are not true. The world was not created in 6 days by somebody who rested on the seventh day. Didn't happen. The world was not created by a god churning the universe in a giant milk churn, etc. Some of these are very beautiful, these origin stories. They're kind of poetry of a kind, but they're not true. What we know about, up to a point, is the origin of the universe. We probably can agree that there was a Big Bang and things came after that.
But in the context of this book, why was it important to reiterate those?
You have no idea how many people have asked me in the last 20 months if, as a result of the miracle of my survival, if I've discovered religion. And the answer is no, because what I discovered was the miracle of science. The fact that this extraordinary job was done on my body, not just to save my life, but to leave me kind of functional, able to get up and walk around.
A miracle, nevertheless.
A miracle, but a miracle created by human knowledge, not by the intervention. I don't believe that some divine hand reached down to protect me. Nor do I have any evidence. I mean, I believe in the evidence of my now eye. And at that moment of near death, nothing miraculous happened. No pearly gates, no fires of hell, no heavenly choirs, no tunnel of light, no kind of sense of lifting out of the body, none of that. Just, in fact, it was the opposite. It was an intensely physical experience. I'd rarely felt so much in my body, as in that moment when I thought it was about to expire. So, religion didn't show up. And
yet, towards the end of the book, you talk about the weaponization of religion. And you, again, felt important to talk about that. It felt important to talk about that. When it is forced on non-believers, or when non-believers are, quote, prevented from robust or humorous expression of their non-belief. Where do you see that at its most acute right now? Which countries?
Well, all over the place. Right here in the United States. The power of evangelical Christianity is what was responsible for the destruction of Roe v. Wade. That's straightforward equation. Of course, in the Islamic world, it's different in different countries, but there are some places where very extreme versions of Islam. For example, Saudi Arabia, where Wahhabi Islam is one of the most extreme variations, or the Iran of the Ayatollahs, which is a very extreme version of Shia Islam.
And India.
And India, where this new radical Hinduism that has emerged very powerfully discriminates against people of other religions and has the power to destabilize the country by bringing back kind of large-scale sectarian violence. Wherever, in these three, I guess in England is the only place where religion probably still isn't that important. There's this funny story about how, when Blair was president, he was actually very religious. And his handlers had to kind of conceal it. Because in England, if you seem too religious, you lose votes.
Is that still the case?
Still the case. I think in America, you can't get elected dog catcher unless you go to church on Sunday.
You write, we are engaged in a world war of stories, a war between incompatible versions of reality, and we need to learn how to fight it. How should we do that?
Well, by coming up with better stories. You know, I mean, I think one of the ways of understanding what's happening in the Middle East is that you've got two narratives. You know, you've got a kind of Israeli-Jewish narrative about, you know, the Jewish homeland, and you've got a Palestinian narrative about their homeland, and they're fighting over the same patch of land, you know, and they seem to be incompatible narratives, or something very close to incompatible narratives, and so the result is violence, war, death. I think one of the things that happened in England, which allowed the catastrophe of Brexit to happen, was that the Brexit gang sold the majority of the population on a kind of myth of England, you know, some kind of glorious Britannia myth, which could return if only all these foreigners were kicked out. You know. And then the foreigners got kicked out and the country fell apart because there's nobody to pick the harvest. There's nobody to work in the hospitals. You know. And then here, I mean, this is what the whole MAGA movement did. You know, I mean, I've always thought that the thing about Make America Great Again, I want to know when it was great. What's the date we're talking about? You know, that we're supposed to be looking backward to fondly. Is it when there was slavery? Is it before women had the vote? Is it before the civil rights movement? You know, what is it that we have to erase in order to make America great again? And of course, the point about the Golden Age myth is that it's always a myth. There's no such time, you know. But you can persuade people to swallow it if you do it right. And that's what's been going. You know, that's what Putin's been doing with Ukraine. He's been selling his audience on a story of how the Ukrainians are Nazis, and how there's a global conspiracy against poor old Russia.
So whose job is it to tell better stories?
It's all of us, you know. I mean, writers, journalists, politicians. We've got to come up with narratives that counter these narratives. Otherwise, we're lost.
You say that writers own the future.
Yeah, because books are what survives of us, you know. I mean, I think just one little example. If we now think about Napoleon Bonaparte's Russian campaign, we think about War and Peace. You know, and Tolstoy kind of owns Napoleon's Russian campaign. And in that way, what happens is that books, you know, writers have no armies, no physical power in that way, and the actual physical bodies of writers are often sacrificed to power. But the work ends up defining the human race. You know, and you only have to look back 100, 200 years and you see that it's the books that tell us who we were. And the books of this time will tell the future who we were.
That's really wonderful. I want to ask you a very personal question, if I may. I wonder, just going back to the idea of premonition, whether it wasn't perhaps your parents who had the original premonition when they gave you the name Salman.
Well, yes, peaceful, you know, so true.
And safe.
And safe.
A survivor.
Yeah, yeah. They knew a lot, my parents. I mean, even to invent the family name Rushdie, based on the philosopher Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who had a life not unlike mine. Progressive thinker, had his books banned and burned, etc. My father chose that name, handed it to me.
I'm so grateful to talk to you again.
Thank you. It's been very nice.